One of the most influential political films in history, The Battle of Algiers vividly recreates a violent yet critical year in Algerian struggle for independence from French colonialism. Directed by Gio Pontecorvo, this 1966 historical drama follows charismatic Algerian resistance leader Ali Lapointe and commander of the French forces, Colonel Mathieu, as they resort to ever-increasing brutality and violence to defend their country and their ideals. While many war films tend to glorify combat for the purposes of entertainment, The Battle of Algiers employs third cinema storytelling values. This movie places realism above escapism. It uses film as a compelling means of mass persuasion, cultural consolidation, and consciousness raising. Rather than allowing viewers to escape the hardships of normal life, it puts them face to face with tumultuous reality of war. Through tactics representative of third cinema, such as guerrilla filming, on-location shooting, and unknown talent, The Battle of Algiers not only commentates honestly on the logistical and ethical struggles of war, but also places the audience in the front line of battle. It is because of this cinematic realism that the film is still current and relevant even 50 years after its release.
Starting in 1830, the French begin their occupation and conquest of Algeria. This was the closest French colony in relationship to France itself, and was at times considered to be part of France by the French government. But unlike the French homeland, Algeria had a 99% Muslim population. In 1954, the FLN, or Fédération de Libération Nationale, was established as Algeria's National Liberation Front, declaring independence on November 1st of that year. The FLN tries to draw international attention by targeting dense urban areas in 1956. The FLN presence in Algeria intensifies, and the Battle of Algeria officially begins when the FLN plants 3 bombs in public venues. Guerrilla skirmishes, public attacks, and brutal French retaliations become frequent in the tight urban areas of Algiers. The FLN leaders are forced to flee Algeria due to increasing threats of French counter-violence after a failed UN vote to support the FLN strike. These leaders are soon hunted down by intelligence gained throughout torture by their fellow FLN members. In 1957, the French technically win the war after killing Laporte and destroying the rebel network. But insurrection continues to grow throughout Algeria until 1963, when the French finally withdraw from the state, allowing Algeria to become its own independent country.
Gillo Pontecorvo was born into a Jewish family on November 19, 1919. Due to the political situation in Europe in late 1930s, Gillo and his family moved to France in order to escape Italy's fascist racial laws. During the war, Gillo got involved with the Italian Communist Party, where he would go on news-gathering missions. During the same time, he was also part of an underground newspaper called L'Unità. He participated in organizing a youth front and later became director of Patuglia, a journal of combined communist and social youth. This might explain why Gillo had so much understanding of the war, politics, and oppression of youth. With so much to say, Gillo Pontecorvo began experimenting with new forms of communication. He made a few documentaries on 16mm film, then worked as assistant director for filmmakers like Giancarlo Menotti and Mario Monicelli. In 1955, he directed his first feature film called La Grande Strada Azzurra. In 1959, Pontecorvo was asked to make a film on the Nazi concentration camps. This movie was called Capo. At this time, Pontecorvo began experimenting with negatives to produce a grainy newsreel effect that he would use on Battle of Algiers. 2 years later, he directed Battle of Algiers, and then came Quemada, a film based on the character of William Walker, who supports a slave rebellion in the Spanish Caribbean on behalf of British interests. 10 years later came Ogro, a film he always regretted, so let's not talk about it.
Third cinema started in the 1960s by 2 Argentinian filmmakers, Fernando Salinas and Octavio Gentino, whose manifest towards the third cinema outlined tenets that broke away from the Hollywood system and moved towards anti-colonialism and inspired revolution against class, racial, and gender inequalities. Third cinema's main goals were to raise political consciousness of the viewer, expose historical, social, political, and/or economic policies that had led to exploitative conditions for the nation, engage spectators in reflection that would inspire them to improve their own conditions and take revolutionary actions, create films that would express the experiences of the masses of a particular region, and produce and distribute films that were uncensored by oppressive entities. Third cinema saw the camera as a weapon and filmmakers as guerrilla fighters, actively participating in revolutionary struggle and not just passively documenting it. While The Battle of Algiers is considered a film of the Third Cinema movement, it was released 5 years before the Tour de Third Cinema Manifest was released. Because of this, The Battle of Algiers' focus on political content coincides with Third Cinema's values, but takes more of an Italian neorealist stance stylistically, with on-location shooting, non-professional actors, and episodic and discontinuous narratives. According to Nancy Virtue's article, Poaching Within the System, Guido Pontecorvo's Tactical Aesthetics, The Battle of Algiers shares neorealism's concern of ordinary people caught up in larger social struggles, but does so with a more revolutionary approach like that of Third Cinema.
It produced much political controversy in France in the 60s because it was unclear of whose side the film was on, and it was thus banned for several years. Despite the relatively objective take, many French citizens believed it was too sympathetic to the Algerian point of view. Then, after the ban, threats from fascist groups prevented screening for an additional 4 years. Some of the scenes depicting torture of Algerians by the French authorities were even cut from versions released in the US and the UK. It has been used as a training video by revolutionary groups as well as government strategists. In 2003, when the US was challenged by guerrilla and terrorist attacks in Iraq, the Pentagon held a mandatory screening of the Battle of Algiers to prompt informative discussion about how their own soldiers could learn from the tactical decisions made by the French. According to the New York Times, the Pentagon's showing urged audiences to consider and discuss the implicit issues at the core of the film, the problematic but alluring efficacy of brutal and repressive means in fighting clandestine terrorists. Or, more specifically, the advantages and costs of resorting to torture and intimidation in seeking vital human intelligence about enemy plans. The continued viewership and utilization of this film are a testament to its timeless importance and relevance. And although The Battle of Algiers was released more than 50 years ago, its realism will allow it to remain pertinent for years to come. As long as people continue to fight for freedom, this film will continue to be relevant.